Have you ever stood alone in an empty church during a snowstorm so thick it silences your thoughts? In this winter horror story, I want you to imagine the cold not as a weather, but as a presence. If you're new here, subscribe for more original horror stories like The Bell Rings in Winter. And if the bell rings while you're listening, don't answer it. Let's begin. I had never believed in omens. Maybe that's what drew me to the church in the first place. The clean lines of the roof swallowed by snow, the arched windows cloaked in frost, the steeple jagged like a broken finger pointed at the sky. It wasn't foreboding to me, just forgotten, quiet. And after a decade of working seasonal maintenance jobs up and down New England, I'd grown to like forgotten things. The inheritance came in a letter, yellowed and bent at the corners, forwarded twice to find me. To Mr. Elijah Trenholm, it began, my name scrawled in an old, hesitant hand. Inside was a short note from a law office in Hampshire County, informing me that I had been named sole beneficiary to a parcel of land in the town of Grindle Hollow. A church. No explanation. No mention of the relative who'd left it to me. Only one line stood out. Caretaking is owed through blood. I laughed when I read that. Then I circled the date on my wall calendar and packed my truck. Grindle Hollow didn't show up on Google Maps. I had to dig into old survey records to find it. Snow had already started falling when I made the drive up the winding roads of western Massachusetts, flanked on either side by forests that looked ancient, untouched. The locals I stopped to ask either hadn't heard of the village or wouldn't speak of it. One old man in a general store just looked past me and muttered, "Don't go in winter." I should have listened, but the road narrowed and the trees parted, and there it was, Grindle Hollow. A cluster of old Victorian homes sunken in the snow, their windows dark. The church stood at the center like a crown made of bones, whitewashed wood now grayed with rot, icicles hanging from the eaves like teeth. The sign out front was half buried in a drift. I brushed the snow off with my gloved hand. St. Thoriel's, 1849. Saint who? The inside smelled of cedar and cold stone. Dust clung to everything. I could see my breath fog the air as I stepped into the nave. The pews were still lined up in perfect formation, as if waiting for a congregation that had only just stepped outside for a moment. The altar was bare, except for an iron bell pull, cord frayed with age, hanging from the ceiling of the steeple. The bell itself had long since cracked, according to the letter from the law firm. Structural fatigue. Unsafe to ring. And yet, that first night, as snow thickened outside and wind howled through the shutters, I heard it, gonging out a deep, low sound. Not metal against metal, but something more organic. Like a groan from beneath the earth. I sat up in my cot, blinking into the dark. Maybe it was a dream, or the wind. But the sound came again, closer this time. Not from above, but from the nave. I got up, flashlight in hand. The old boards creaked beneath me. My breath came out in ragged clouds. The N01 there, but the bell cord was swinging. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a squirrel had gotten into the steeple. But the unease settled into my bones like the cold, slow, and sure. The next day, I climbed up into the bell tower. The spiral stairs were slick with frost. I gripped the railing and made my way up into the dark. The bell was there. Iron, split down one side with a jagged crack that made it useless. Useless, but not silent. There was no mechanism, no clapper, nothing that could have made it ring. I backed down the steps, trying to steady my breathing. That night, it rang again, and I swear to God, it was louder. 3 days passed. Each night, the bell sounded during the worst of the storm, always at the same time, 3:13 a.m. The tolling would last for 13 counts, then stop. And each time, I'd find the cord swinging gently, though no one had touched it. I began to dream of snow, not just falling snow, but snow packed into endless tunnels, winding through roots and stone. I wandered in the dark, barefoot, hearing whispers from behind the walls. Elijah. Sometimes they spoke my name. Sometimes they said other things. Keeper of the cold, blood to bind, breath to waken. One night, I awoke to find frost patterns on the walls of the sanctuary, not random, but shaped. Spirals, eyes, a ring of 13 marks that circled my cot like footprints in powder. And then I noticed something else. The bell was no longer cracked. The morning after I noticed the crack had vanished, I climbed the tower again, hands numb even through my gloves. I had to know if it was just my imagination, if the frost and the dreams were messing with me. It wasn't. The crack was gone. Smooth iron now gleamed faintly in the dim winter light that filtered through the narrow slats. The metal was cold, but not frozen. It felt warm, somehow. Not like something radiating heat, but like touching flesh that had never known the sun. That was the first day I heard it during the daylight. It was only for a second, just as I stepped off the tower stairs. A single toll, sudden and shuddering, echoing through the nave. I ran back up. No one there. Nothing moved. But the air was thick, vibrating with a low, inaudible hum. I didn't leave the church again that day. I didn't even eat. I sat in the sanctuary, staring at the altar as the wind howled outside, and wondered if I was going mad. When the snowstorm hit that night, it was worse than any before. The power line snapped sometime after midnight, plunging the church into darkness. I lit the oil lamps I'd found in the vestry, their flickering orange glow throwing long shadows across the walls. I thought I could hold out, ride the storm, maybe even get back to town once it cleared. But then the bell rang again, 13 times, perfectly spaced, like the heartbeat of some enormous creature buried beneath the floorboards. This time, I didn't just sit and listen. I stood, walked to the front doors, opened them. Snow poured in like a living thing, blinding and merciless. But the bell tolled louder out there, not dimmer, not muffled. It called to me. I stepped into the storm. I don't remember how far I walked, only that I didn't feel cold. My boots crunched on ice that had formed into strange patterns, runes maybe, or letters of a language I didn't know. The forest beyond the church loomed, dark and ancient, but the bell led me, like a rope around my ribs, pulling. There, in a hollow between the trees, I saw them. Figures in white robes, hoods pulled low, their hands bare and blue with frost. They stood in a circle around a mound of snow, perfectly formed. The moment I stepped closer, they turned in unison. None of them had faces, only blank, smooth skin where eyes, mouths, and noses should be pale like porcelain, stretched over empty sockets. Yet I knew they were looking at me, The bell tolled one final time. Then they knelt, not to me, but to the mound, and from beneath it, a shape began to rise. I awoke in the church, shivering, half buried in snow that had somehow drifted in through closed doors. My clothes were soaked, my hands frostbitten. The lamps had all gone out, and around me, in the frost on the walls, the spiral symbols had returned clearer now. More ordered. In the center of the nave, something had been carved into the floorboards, a perfect circle divided into 13 spokes, each marked with an ancient sigil. My name was etched at the center. I didn't leave the church again for 2 days. I ate sparingly, slept only in fits. I began keeping notes, trying to understand the cycle. The bell rang every night now, regardless of snowfall. Sometimes I saw lights in the woods. Sometimes I saw the robed figures just standing at the tree line, unmoving, watching. The crack in the bell didn't return, and one night, I heard something else from the steeple. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing in a circle just above me. But no one came down the stairs. No one answered when I shouted. That night, the dreams were worse. Not tunnels anymore, roots. Long, winding, white roots curling through the earth, squeezing rock and bone. I was beneath them, my body frozen solid, but still alive. I could feel the cold pulsing in my veins, like blood turned to snowmelt. And I wasn't alone. You are the 13th, the voice said. You were the bell ringer. I tried to leave. I packed a bag, cleared the snow from my truck, and set out toward the main road before dawn. But the forest had changed. The way out was gone. The trees were too close together now, the path a maze of white limbs and frost-glazed trunks. I drove for what felt like hours, only to find myself pulling back into Grindle Hollow from the opposite side. The town was folded in on itself, trapped in some impossible loop, and the church bell rang, faintly, even then. The village wasn't abandoned. It was held, preserved in winter's grasp like a fly in amber. Back inside, I started digging through the church's archives. There were boxes upon boxes of old records stored in the crypt beneath the altar, birth and death registries, tithing logs, old sermons. One journal caught my eye. The cover bore the initials JT, and the entries were dated over 100 years ago. The author was a man named Jonas Trenholm. My ancestor. The entries started mundane. Repairs to the bell rope, bad harvests, harsh winters. But then, mid-January of 1891, the tone changed. We rang the bell again last night. The snow came as promised. She is pleased. The roots sing beneath us. Another entry. The 13th has not yet arrived. Without the blood, the rite fails. The hollow cannot hold. And finally, I have hidden the sigils beneath the nave, sealed the cord in iron. The bell must not ring. It calls her too, clearly now. I fear we were only ever vessels. I slammed the journal shut. Vessels. The bell was never meant to summon the villagers, it summoned her. The being beneath the snow. The one they called Mother Snow, or sometimes the deep winter, or the white root. And now I had rung it. I stopped sleeping. The wind howled constantly now, even when the air outside lay still. The bell rang not just at night, but at odd hours, dawn, dusk, sometimes in the very middle of a sentence I was writing. And I always answered. That's what scared me most. I started climbing the steeple without realizing I'd stood up. I'd reached the bell chamber, hand extended toward the frayed rope, only to snap out of it, heart pounding, just inches from ringing it again. But sometimes I woke up to find the bell still swinging. It didn't need me anymore. I scoured the journal from Jonas Trenholm, desperate for something I could use, some ritual, counterspell. Even a warning point. One phrase came up over and over. The 13th binds the frost. I began to understand. Every generation, the town offered a caretaker, someone to tend the church in winter, to guard the seal beneath the altar. It wasn't just tradition, it was containment, a bloodline duty. But now that I had rung the bell, she was waking. The nights grew worse. I'd hear scratching inside the walls, soft at first, like mice, then louder, scraping claws against stone, dragging along the rafters. The stained glass swept frozen water. Shapes flickered just behind the colored panes, long-limbed, hunched things that moved wrong. Sometimes, the faceless figures appeared in the pews, silent, waiting. I tried confronting them once, strode down the aisle, and reached out to touch one. My hand passed through it. It was made of snow, loosely packed, but it held its shape as if animated by something beneath it. It turned its head slowly toward me. No face, and yet I knew it saw me. The next morning, the altar was dusted with frost in the shape of a circle. My name was in the center again. But now, others were carved around it. 12 others, and all the names were crossed out. I turned to fire. I burned half the church records. I dragged the pews into a pile and lit them in the sanctuary, hoping the warmth might keep whatever was creeping in at bay. But even with flames roaring, I could see my breath, and through the smoke, I saw the spiral frost on the walls begin to move. Not melt, move, curling inward, spinning like a drain, drawing all the warmth with it. That's when I saw her. She didn't come crashing through the wall or drop from the ceiling. She simply stepped forward, out of the shadows, as if she'd always been standing there, tall, pale, dressed in funeral rags stitched from birch bark and snowmelt. Her eyes were holes, not empty, but filled with something black and bottomless, like a frozen lake that had never known light. Her mouth was a crack, always smiling, never opened. I couldn't move. The fire behind me died to embers. I didn't feel afraid, not in the usual sense. It was something deeper, like my bones knew her name, like my blood had heard her voice before I was born. Do you know your purpose now? She didn't speak aloud, but the words bloomed in my skull. I tried to answer, but my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. My limbs were lead. My heartbeat slowed, sinking with a deeper rhythm beneath the floorboards. Thump, thump. 13 beats. Then she was gone. That night, the storm reached its peak. Snow didn't fall, it poured. Thick as wool, heavy as ash. I boarded the windows, locked the doors, but still the cold crept in, not from outside, but below, the cellar. I hadn't gone down since the first week. The stairs had collapsed, and I'd assumed the space beneath was empty save for mold and stone. But that night, I heard a sound coming from the trapdoor near the altar. Not a voice, Not footsteps. Breathing. Heavy. Wet. Rhythmic. I pried the boards up, one by one, and the air that rose from the gap hit me like a wall of ancient ice. The breathing stopped the moment the door creaked open. The pit below was black and deeper than it had any right to be. And then the bell tolled. This time, it came not from the steeple, but beneath me. I dropped the lantern into the hole. It fell for too long, far too long. Then, briefly, the flame lit something at the bottom, white roots. Twisting, writhing. A single massive eye opened in the dark and blinked. I sealed the trapdoor. I wrote letters. To anyone. Everyone. I didn't know what else to do. One of them was to you. Yes, you. If you've read this far, I don't know if the hollow still exists outside the snow, or if the church has become a place no road can reach. Maybe I never escaped. Maybe I'm still there, seated beneath the bell, listening for that final toll. But if you've inherited this place, if someone offers you a winter caretaker job in Grindle Hollow, don't answer, because the bell always needs ringing, and someone always hears. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking, not in my bed, not on the pews where I'd taken to sleeping, but in the bell tower, my back against the stone, the rope in my hand. I hadn't climbed the stairs. I hadn't touched the rope, but there I was, fingers bloodied from gripping the coarse fibers too tightly. The bell swayed above me, still, waiting. I pulled away and stumbled down the stairs. Every step echoed with something deeper, like my footfalls stirred something just beneath the surface of the earth. The whole church seemed to breathe now. Floorboards bowed and flexed with each exhale. Walls creaked. Windows fogged with condensation that formed words in languages I'd never learned, but still understood that I was unraveling. Or being rewritten. That night, the storm broke, and with it, the sky. Not with lightning, but with silence. Everything stopped. No wind, no snowfall, no bell. And in that silence, I heard singing, low, wordless, a harmony of many voices, distant but drawing near. I went to the door. The village square was full. The robed figures stood in a perfect circle, 13 in total. Their hoods no longer hid faces, because there were no faces left to hide, only smooth bone-white masks fused to flesh. They turned as one to face the church, not threatening, just waiting. I opened the doors. I stepped into the circle, and the bell rang. But not from the steeple, not from the ground. From me. I felt it echo in my chest, a vibration in my ribs, my spine, my teeth. It rang 13 times, and with each toll, the world pulled back like curtains from a stage. I saw the roots again, massive and pale, threading through the village. Not beneath it, through it. Houses, streets, wells, all perched atop a vast, slumbering body. She had never been beneath the town. She was the town, the bell, the snow, the church itself, organs in a great, frozen thing that had dreamed of itself as a village to keep from waking. And I had wrung her heart. The circle of figures closed around me. One by one, they removed their robes. Underneath, their bodies were etched with frostbite and sigils carved into their flesh. Some were ancient. Others looked barely older than me. And they smiled, not with mouths, But with the calm of those who no longer feared the cold, point one stepped forward and handed me a robe. I put it on. I don't know why. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was afraid. But more than anything, it felt inevitable. The others began to sing again, not in joy or worship, but in a ritual cadence that matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. I understood it now. The 13th binds the frost, each generation. The 13th caretaker must accept the cold willingly. Only then would she sleep another cycle. Only then would the storm rest. The bell was not a warning. It was a call for submission, and I answered. The next morning, the snow had stopped. The sun rose, weak and pale, through thin gray clouds. The trees were still. The wind had died. I sat in the church, alone. The altar had grown over with frost, crystal filigree curling around the wood-like veins. The trapdoor no longer led to the pit. It was sealed, covered with smooth stone. No sound came from below. I went to the steeple one final time. The bell hung silent. Whole. I looked out across Grindle Hollow. No more figures in the forest. No more lights in the snow. The hollow had returned to its slumber, as it had for generations, and I had taken my place among the others before me. The 13th. I am not writing this for rescue. I don't need saving. I am writing this because one day the storm will return, and when it does, the bell will ring again. You might hear it in your sleep. Or in the distance during a quiet snowfall. Or in the bones of a building older than memory. When you do, ask yourself, are you next? If the snow spoke to you tonight, leave it in the comments. Tell me, what was the most chilling part of the bell rings in winter? Was it the bell, the 13th, or the idea that she's not below, she's all around you? Like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying stories that whisper in the dark. Until next time, may the storm never find your name.